Okay, so you want to buy a house in Ohio for $10,000. Less than a used car, less than a semester of community college. A real house, with real walls and a real roof, in a real American city, for the price of a decent laptop. Here's the strange part. This isn't a scam listing, and it isn't a fixer-upper photographed at a flattering angle. These houses are genuinely for sale, genuinely that cheap, and genuinely sitting empty for years at a time, and the reason has almost nothing to do with the house itself. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what a $10,000 house actually costs to own once you factor in everything the listing doesn't mention, why entire blocks of a major American city can trade for less than a parking spot in Manhattan, and why the smart money in Ohio isn't buying these houses at all, it's buying the land underneath 100 of them at once. Let's start with where these listings actually come from. Cities like Youngstown, Cleveland, and Dayton have entire neighborhoods where three-bedroom houses list for $5,000 to $15,000. These aren't rural cabins. Youngstown's population peaked at 170,000 in 1930, tied almost entirely to the steel industry. By 2020, it had fallen to around 60,000. That's a population collapse of nearly 2/3, and the housing stock never left. The city still physically contains enough houses for 170,000 people, and only a third of that many people are left to live in them. When supply stays fixed and demand falls by 2/3, price doesn't just drop, it approaches zero. Because a house nobody wants to live in isn't really an asset, it's a liability wearing an address. So here's the actual price of entry, and it isn't $10,000. First, back taxes. A huge share of these listings are houses the previous owner walked away from, specifically because the accumulated property tax debt exceeded what the house was worth. Buy the house, and in many cases you inherit that debt, sometimes $3,000 to $8,000 just to clear the county's claim before you own a clean title. Second, the inspection you probably won't get, because at this price point, sellers rarely allow one, and lenders won't touch a mortgage this small anyway, so almost every one of these sales is cash, as is, no contingencies. Third, and this is where the real number lives, deferred maintenance. A house that's been vacant or under-maintained for a decade in a climate with real winters doesn't just need paint. Roof replacement runs $8,000 to $15,000. A failed furnace and duct system, $5,000 to $10,000. Knob and tube wiring that needs a full rewire to pass any inspection, $6,000 to $12,000. Lead paint remediation, required in any pre-1978 house if you plan to rent it out, another few thousand. Add it up, and a realistic, livable renovation of a $10,000 shell runs $40,000 to $80,000, sometimes more. You didn't buy a $10,000 house. You bought a $50,000 house with a $10,000 down payment disguised as the sticker price. Now, here's the part that actually explains why nobody wants it, and it's not the renovation bill, it's the resale ceiling. In neighborhoods like this, comparable sales, the number an appraiser is legally required to use, are themselves $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. You can pour $80,000 into a full renovation, and the appraised value of the finished house might still land at $35,000 or $40,000, because the bank doesn't care what you spent. It cares what the house next door sold for. This is called being upside down before you've even finished the project. And it's the single biggest reason contractors and flippers avoid these blocks entirely, no matter how cheap the entry price looks. You cannot out-renovate a neighborhood's comparable sales. Youngstown itself ran a real-world experiment in exactly this problem, and it's one of the most studied urban planning cases in the country. In 2005, the city adopted a plan called Youngstown 2010, and its central, genuinely radical idea was this. Stop pretending the city was going to grow back to 170,000 people, and instead, plan for a smaller footprint on purpose. The city began systematically demolishing vacant houses, sometimes entire blocks at a time, consolidating remaining residents into a smaller core, and converting demolished lots into green space, community gardens, and reclaimed land. Since the early 2000s, the Youngstown Neighborhood Development Corporation has coordinated the demolition of well over 2,000 vacant structures citywide. Each demolition costs the city somewhere between $7,000 and $15,000 in public funds, meaning in a meaningful number of cases, it is literally cheaper for the city to tear a house down than for anyone to buy and fix it. That's the number that should recalibrate how you think about this entire asset class. When the city itself will pay $10,000 to remove a structure, a private buyer paying $10,000 to acquire the same structure isn't getting a discount. They're on the opposite side of the same transaction the city is willing to pay to get out of. So who actually buys these houses and makes money doing it? Not individual homebuyers mostly. The real activity comes from two directions. The first is land banks, specifically the Cuyahoga Land Bank in Cleveland and similar county-run entities across Ohio, which acquire tax-delinquent and abandoned properties in bulk, often for $1, specifically to either demolish them or rehab and resell them under deed restrictions that require owner occupancy, preventing the exact flipping cycle that hollowed out these neighborhoods in the first place. The Cuyahoga Land Bank alone has handled more than 20,000 properties since its founding in 2009, functioning less like a business and more like a slow-motion triage system for an entire county's housing stock. The second group is bulk investors, who aren't buying one $10,000 house, they're buying 40 of them in a single package from a motivated seller or at a sheriff's tax sale at an even steeper discount, $3,000 to $5,000 each. Their model isn't renovation and resale, it's minimal repair rental. Patch the roof, don't replace it. Fix the furnace, don't rewire the house. Rent it out for $400 to $600 a month to a tenant who has no other options in that price range, and treat the eventual total loss of the structure, to fire, to collapse, to condemnation, as a fully priced-in cost of doing business, because at $3,000 a house, even 2 or 3 years of rental income before the thing becomes unlivable is a positive return. This is the version of the business that actually generates a profit at this price point, and it should tell you something uncomfortable. The economics only work if you stop thinking of the house as a home you'll ever have to live in, sell, or leave to your kids, and start thinking of it purely as a short-lived cash flow instrument sitting on a piece of dirt, with the dirt itself, not the structure, as the only part of the asset that doesn't decay. Time to pull it together. 2 honest scenarios, real numbers. Scenario 1, you as the individual buyer trying to make this your home, $10,000 purchase price, $4,000 to $8,000 in back taxes, $50,000 to $70,000 in real renovation costs to make the house safe and livable to code. Total investment, $65,000 to $90,000. Appraised resale value in most of these neighborhoods, $35,000 to $45,000, because the comparable sales around you haven't moved. You are underwater the moment the last contractor leaves by $25,000 to $50,000, and the only way that math ever works in your favor is if you plan to live there for a decade or more and never need to sell or refinance based on market value. Scenario 2, the bulk rental investor. 40 houses acquired at an average of $3,000 each through a tax sale, $120,000 total. Minimal patch repairs, roughly $2,000 per house, $80,000. Total investment, $200,000 for 40 rental units. Rented at $500 a month each, that's $20,000 a month in gross rent. Before vacancy, before the properties you inevitably lose to condemnation or fire in a portfolio this size. Even accounting for a realistic 30% of the portfolio becoming a total loss within 5 years, the remaining units pay back the entire $200,000 investment in under 2 years, and everything after that is closer to pure cash flow than most real estate anywhere else in the country. So if you're going to buy a $10,000 house in Ohio, understand what you're actually pricing. It was never the house. It's a bet on whether the city around it grows or keeps shrinking, and in most of these neighborhoods, that bet has already been made by the city itself in the form of a demolition contract cheaper than your down payment. The house isn't worthless because it's falling apart. It's worthless because the market already knows what the city is planning to do with the lot underneath it.